Reactive training systems.
Yeah, so I think the biggest question when it comes to the work capacity thing, and the biggest thing that we almost came to disagreement on is, does work capacity even need to improve? Like, why do you want more work capacity? Because we're assuming in a bottleneck situation, the lifter is not making progress that they want to make. So you've got to, work through the issues of, okay, well, is it technique? Is it frequency? Is it like intensity and all of that? But there's going to come a point where you've kind of nailed everything you can, and you just need to get the lifter to do more. Like, you just need more muscle on their frame, or just more reps throughout the week to just give more stimulus. And then the question is then from there, okay, well, where do we put it? And for me, with my own beliefs in my training, what I found is that typically the best place for me to start, and what I always like to try to do, is give it on I start increasing the lowest impact work first. So for example, on a bench press, like for a lifter, like we just need more volume, more muscle mass. Like, I'm very hesitant to want to add much to their bench pressing, where I will much sooner add like tricep extensions, pec flies, or like delt raises first to try and just build tissue. And from there be like, okay, is this enough? Are we seeing progress? If not, maybe, okay, let's stop doing like these like supplementary, like tertiary type exercises. Let's move to more of a secondary one where it's, okay, no, we need to actually start pushing like JM presses, or, like heavy skull crushers or something like that. Then building it up from like a base up perspective till we get to, okay, like that wasn't enough. Now we need to increase like back down volume. Okay, now we need to start increasing like top sets. Like, we need to do 2 top sets per session instead of 1, etc. That was my main, that's just like the baseline of my work capacity, views, and like how to build it and like where to go from there. Reason is for that is, number one, the lowest intensity stuff, like the single joint isolation stuff, it's just going to beat people up less. So it's just the safest bet. Like, I know a lifter can handle more tricep extensions. It's pretty easy to recover from those. And also, it just leaves a room for like more later. The really heavy, stuff, like just like actually competition bench pressing more, those have the most like stimulus on them. They absolutely do. So if you pull those cards earlier, there's something that you can't pull later. You know what I mean? There's only so much somebody can tolerate. You're never going to get somebody to 60 sets of benching a week. So if their lifetime limit is going to be like 30, pushing them from 20 to 30 now might mean 4 years down the road, you don't have a weapon that you wanted to have. Yeah, I think that's just the very broad, basic view of my work capacity theory. Yeah. I guess from there, if you could kind of remind me, Kenny, what was the differences that you had? Like, what would we discuss there?
We were pretty similar, I think, on just the general idea that, like, yes, aim for the low impact stuff first, or right. If a lifter is at twice a week a benching or something, maybe you can look to sneak in a third bench session or something somewhere, and maybe that is just better tolerated if they right. If that frequency is limiting their work capacity or how much they can tolerate. Sure. And I think maybe the main difference was where to go from there, where like you it sounds like, so correct me if I'm wrong, sounds like you'd add a lot of these kind of more accessory movements, these isolation type movements, and then just sort of keep them there, and might not necessarily try to go to barbell movements as sort of the next step. In some cases, I would absolutely do that. There are sometimes you just shouldn't add more that might be truly unwise, either in terms of recovery, injury history, or anything for the lifter. In some cases, we might, or I've done blocks targeted at building work capacity, doing maybe time-limited rests, or a timed AMRAP. You have to accumulate a certain amount of work in a certain amount of time, or circuit training, where it's like you're going to bounce between these exercises for a certain period of time. And this is done to hopefully globally bring up your ability to tolerate work. And maybe the next block could have 10% additional stress, additional workload, and wouldn't necessarily have to be in the form of these smaller, more isolated movements. So I think that was maybe the main difference, but I defer to Mike on energy systems. I know that you've done a lot of work with that type of training.
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea to kind of give you guys at least my working definition for work capacity. Usually, I find that it's a term that it sounds like we're all kind of on the same page, but I know that other people sometimes mean slightly different things. So the way I would define work capacity is the amount of work that you're tolerating, the amount of work that you can recover from. So if you look at a long-term baseline, what's your baseline level of workload over like the last 3 months? That's something like your work capacity, because you can't really exceed your ability to recover for long periods of time like that. Like in an activity like powerlifting, you end up getting something that's breaking down, and that's not usually where you want to be. So yeah, that's kind of how that's how I would calculate what your work capacity is. So when I think about bringing up somebody's work capacity, what can we do to raise that baseline level of work that you're tolerating? And it kind of surprised me that I guess I don't know how else you would do it. How else would you do it other than to add in some work that people tolerate well? Old school Louis Simmons gets a lot of shit on the internet, but that's kind of what he was talking about. It's funny because back in the 90s and early 2000s, they would talk about doing these GPP workouts, and it was some kind of sled dragging and stuff like that. So people kind of equate these things. Oh, you drag a sled and that equals GPP work. It equals increased work capacity. It's not that. It's that what he's trying to do is he's thinking, okay, if you drag a sled, there's no eccentric component to it. Therefore, it's easy to tolerate, easy to recover from. So you could add that in basically for free. Right. And so I guess if you ended up in a situation where you just couldn't add in another set of tricep pushdowns, you just can't, you're at max, right? So maybe that would be an even more ginger thing for you to add in that's even easier to recover from, so you can just kind of eke it along. I don't know. I mean, I don't really find myself reaching for sled dragging. It's just not a thing that I have to reach for ever, but I can conceive of how you might, or why it might seem like a good idea, I guess.
Yeah. I think one of the more nuanced parts of like the work capacity discussion is also like why people are like coming to the work capacity bottlenecks that they get to, because there's different like sort of variables in play. There's cardiovascular fitness. Is somebody not able to recover from more workload just because they cannot get nutrients to their like muscles? Are they not able to pump the blood flow there? So in that sort of situation, I think something like you said, Kenny, like reduce rest times and maybe just like literal direct cardio stuff like that could be the thing you need to do. But there's also stuff like they can recover just fine set to set. Like their muscles are good to go, but maybe like their tendons and joints are getting really beat up or something like that. Or it could just be like they're literally just they don't have the fuel for it. Like they just get drained. Like they're like all of a sudden like they're like not recovering. They're not getting stronger session because they're at their volume limit. So I think pretty much you have to break down very specifically what is the work capacity bottleneck, because I think work capacity is a broad category of issues as well.
Totally. Yeah. Like I've been talking in the training lab more recently about, I've been thinking about training effects being in 3 broad categories: skill, structure, metabolism. Mm-hmm. And really this hits right on the metabolism idea. Like where do cells, muscle cells in particular, where does all this stuff get its energy? Where does cellular energy get derived from? So that includes nutrients, that includes waste product, all that, so systemic energy production is a thing, and powerlifters tend to be bad at it. Not that for a while there, it seemed like it got it wasn't ever really overhyped, but it's like there was like this sub-community within powerlifting that was like, oh yeah, you do need to do cardio because it helps you recover between sessions. And yeah, that's true. And most powerlifters don't take it seriously enough, but you also don't need to like really go in on this, like it's not something that drives your total up, but it can help a little bit. So yeah, like not being completely out of shape is probably useful,
That is, I have been, at least through Instagram, seeing a bit more of a swing in that direction, which the pro like cardiovascular fitness and stuff, which I am all about. Notably seeing just everyone on earth posting their daily average step count and stuff like that. I think it was mostly like, I think Rondell Hunt has been one of the biggest like guys just like posting it. Now everyone's, I got to get my 10,000 steps in. So credit to him and whoever else has been pushing it. But do you find any other like specific types of, metabolic fitness to be that useful beyond just like a total movement throughout the day via step count and stuff like that? Like, do you think there's any other specific metrics like recovery, hit cardio, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what we need it to do, right? Like
Yeah.
Kenny alluded to some like rest interval controlled training. And I would do that if I had somebody who wasn't recovering very well. Set to set workouts are just taking a really long time. We can't get in the amount of work we need to do because we're just kind of out of shape. I would say systemic is part of that. And then also like this metabolic efficiency is part of it too. It's just kind of the spectrum, right? Of what's your energy production rate, calories per minute, or I'm sure there's some essential metric for it, but step count is one of them. It's like a really low intensity energy production, right?
Yeah.
But then it ramps up. So that would be one of them. But like from just a work capacity standpoint, if I had an athlete who I felt like just they need to do more work, but they're not able to do more work because they're just recovery bottlenecked, I would program a block that's aimed at developing their work capacity. But the way I would go about doing that, I would increase the frequency so that our sessions are smaller from session to session. I would choose protocols that are easy to tolerate, so generally lower RPEs that allows us to push volume and recover well from it. And I would pick exercises that are easy to recover from that don't cause a huge amount of soreness. And I would do a block like that lets me do a good amount of work, maybe even push that baseline up a little bit and still recover well and tolerate it well, so that overall baseline can come up and we just acclimate to a higher overall level of work over the next couple of blocks.
Sure, it makes a lot of sense. I think something notable to touch on though, because we keep mentioning like, oh, an athlete needs more work capacity, like they just can't recover. What does that look like, and what are you seeing when you see that somebody just can't recover enough? Because I think that's not something that's very obvious to most people. Oh, this athlete just isn't progressing, or do they need more work capacity to progress?
Yeah, well, you set it up properly in the beginning, I think, when you said that we're talking about an athlete who's not progressing as fast as they would like.
Yeah.
Right. The next component there would be the not recovering piece, and more often than not, that tends to be like joint issues, not so much like muscular soreness. Powerlifters tend to not be limited by muscular soreness. It's usually joint stuff. So that's the other piece. I guess training time is some of it, but motivation to train is some of it. You see these excess fatigue factors come into play, and it is conditional, right? Because if you've got somebody who's already spending a huge amount of time in the gym and already like seeing flagging motivation, maybe you got to question, is that the best strategy to make them do more, right?
Let's really burn this person out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I guess those are all indicators of fatigue. And I mean, you're going to have a conversation anyway, right? Like
absolutely.
Anytime you do this, you're going to be like trying to generate that buy-in. It has to be kind of a joint conclusion that more is at least territory worth exploring.
Yeah. One of the things that I know I see when I'm like the most obvious, okay, you need more work capacity, like you need more recovery, especially in that topic of set to set recovery, we'd be looking at like working on stuff like reduced rest times, or just like outside of training, doing interval training, like bike sprints or something like that. The one thing I look at is, especially on accessories, I look at set to set performance, because there's about a standard, performance drop you'd like to see between sets if you're training like some sort of reasonable intensity. If you're doing like sets of 15 on leg press, your first set shouldn't be 15 and your second one be 9. We're probably hoping for something in the ballpark of yeah,
that's me.
Yeah, the number I have found, mostly through my own training, but also then watching my athletes, is about like 10 to 15% drop in reps between sets. That's what I would consider to be like healthy. Okay, we're fit. But if you're seeing like 30, like you're doing like a set of 20, and then it's a set of 14, and now we're at a set of 9, like with the same weight, all at the same RPE, that's like the first thing I look at, because it's like the most direct. Okay, let's look at like your literal measurable recovery, not just how you feel.
Hey, if Ronnie Coleman was a powerlifting coach, he might have said, everybody wants to build custom training programs, but nobody's got a process for how to do it on the regular. But we do. You see, most coaches rely on trial and error, and that's fine if that's your jam, but we wanted a coherent process. Way back in 2015, when I'd already been coaching for over a decade, I finally had learned enough from enough sources that I was able to put the pieces together into one coherent process. We call it emerging strategies. The bulk of our 16 world record-setting powerlifters set those records using an emerging strategies program. We talk about emerging strategies a ton on this podcast and everywhere. If you ever want a single, thorough explanation for how to implement the emerging strategies process, well, that's the Emerging Strategies course. The Emerging Strategies course includes 8 modules. That's almost 24 hours of video instruction covering everything. We teach fundamental concepts and basics all the way through integrated examples and case studies. You can watch it at your own pace, as fast or as slow as you want. Oh, and you know the RTS community, our private community that offers you just a stupendous amount of value all on its own? Well, if you enroll in the Emerging Strategies course, you get 6 months of that community membership for free. If you have any questions about some concept, you just post it in the network or jump on a live office hour call with one of our RTS coaches and you get your answer. If you'd like to enroll or just learn more, to seeing a full lesson list, all you have to do is go to reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on courses in the main menu. You're going to love it.